Winter in the Middle Ages was not just a season, but a real test of survival. Stone castles were impregnable fortresses that provided excellent protection against enemy arrows and siege engines. But these colossal structures were completely helpless against another, far more formidable enemy, the freezing cold.
Overnight, a massive stone keep would turn into a giant freezer, draining the life from its inhabitants.
And yet, people did not just survive in these harsh conditions. They created amazing engineering systems to preserve heat.
Another offset here.
The early Middle Ages offered very harsh living conditions for the nobility and ordinary soldiers.
In those days, castles were heated by central open hearths located right in the middle of the main hall.
The smoke from the fire lazily escaped through a simple hole in the roof or through tall open windows. The air inside the rooms was more reminiscent of a forest fire than an elite residence. But by the 12th century, a real architectural and engineering revolution had taken place. Fireplaces began to be built directly into the thick stone walls of castles, changing the entire layout. This innovation made it possible to move the source of fire from the center, freeing up a huge amount of space.
It was then that full-fledged vertical chimneys appeared, forever changing the quality of life in castles.
Stone pipes created a strong physical draft that effectively removed combustion products to the roof. The air in the rooms finally became clean and safe for lords and servants to breathe. This system seems primitive to us today, but for that time it was an incredible breakthrough. Being able to breathe without coughing in a winter castle became a sign of real progress and wealth. However, there is an interesting paradox here related to the laws of physics. Despite architectural improvements, early wall-mounted fireplaces were extremely inefficient heaters. Most of the precious heated air literally flew out of the chimney along with the smoke. The fireplace itself only heated a small space directly in front of the open flame. To compensate for these enormous heat losses, engineers took radical measures.
Castle fireplaces began to be built on a truly gigantic scale, striking the imagination.
Some fireboxes could hold an entire tree or allow an adult to stand upright inside. Hundreds of cubic meters of firewood were needed to warm the icy air of the stone hall even slightly. But sitting near such a gigantic fire was a very specific pleasure. A person literally roasted in front of the flames, while their back froze from the drafts. The icy air constantly swept through the huge stone halls, seeking out every crack. Medieval people found themselves caught between extreme heat and piercing cold in the same room. To solve this problem, special wooden screens and benches with high backs were invented. These structures were installed directly in front of the fireplaces, creating an artificial heat zone. The high wooden backs reflected the heat from the fire back onto the people sitting there. At the same time, they served as a reliable shield, protecting their backs from the icy winds blowing through the hall. Modern central heating systems work on the principle of even heat distribution. The medieval approach was different. Create one insanely hot source and hide near it. It's like tourists warming themselves by a campfire in a frosty forest. The only difference is that this forest was located inside the most protected building in the country. The construction of such fireplaces required the highest level of skill from masons and architects. The slightest error in calculating the draft meant that all the smoke would flow back into the room. Castles with good, smoke-free fireplaces were worth their weight in gold. It was a real battle for survival, where bricks and mortar became the engineers' main weapons.
It holds. We proceed.
But even the largest fireplace could not warm the icy stone walls. Stone is an excellent conductor of heat, and in winter it mercilessly drew heat from the rooms. A way had to be found to cut off the living space from this frozen stone mass. And the solution turned out to be no less expensive than the construction of the castle itself. The bare stone walls of castles were not only incredibly gloomy in appearance, they served as giant heat pumps, drawing heat from the interior rooms. Living surrounded by frozen stone is a sure way to get pneumonia. To insulate the living quarters, castle owners began to use thick woven carpets on a massive scale.
Heavy tapestries were hung not flush against the wall, but at a slight distance from it.
The air gap between the cold stone and the heavy wool acted as an excellent heat insulator. It reliably blocked the penetration of dampness and icy air into the room. Modern builders use the same air cushion principle when insulating building facades. The production of such tapestries was an incredibly complex, lengthy, and astronomically expensive process. It took years of manual labor by dozens of weavers to create a single high-quality canvas. Therefore, the presence of tapestries was considered a sign of the highest status and enormous wealth of a lord. It was the equivalent of the modern smart home system, available only to the elite. In addition to their direct utilitarian function, tapestries played a vital aesthetic role. In a world without television or the internet, they served as the main visual entertainment. They depicted complex biblical scenes, battle scenes, or exciting mythological motifs. These vivid images entertained the inhabitants during long winter evenings and demonstrated the owner's level of education. It is interesting to note how these expensive interior items traveled with their owners. When a lord moved from one castle to another, the walls were not left insulated. Servants carefully removed the precious, heavy fabrics and rolled them up into tight rolls. The tapestries were transported along with the rest of the treasury so that the new residents could be immediately insulated upon the lord's arrival. In essence, tapestries were a mobile, reusable thermal insulation system. Modern drywall or mineral wool cannot be taken with you when you move. But medieval lords literally carried warm walls in their carts.
This demonstrates the incredible practicality of the people's thinking in those harsh times.
The wool from which the carpets were woven has unique natural temperature-retaining properties. Even when wet, woolen thread continues to retain heat better than most materials. In the damp conditions of a castle, where fog penetrated through the battlements, this was critically important. No other material could have coped with this task as effectively. The richer the lord, the thicker and denser the tapestries in his chambers. In the most luxurious rooms, the walls were completely hidden behind fabric, creating the illusion of a warm tent. Once inside, it was easy to forget that a meter of frozen stone lay behind the fabric. This was the first step toward creating an autonomous microclimate within a hostile environment. Today, tapestries hang in museums as outstanding works of art. Tour guides talk about their artistic value and the subtlety of their colors. But originally, they were just very beautiful and insanely expensive radiators. Art has always served survival, but over time we have forgotten this practical aspect. But insulating the walls only solved half the problem in combating the castle's cold. The laws of thermodynamics are inexorable. Cold air always sinks. Stone floors remained a veritable ice hell, capable of freezing your feet even through thick leather boots. And this is where the simplest but most ingenious agricultural technology came into play. Stone and tile floors in castles remained icy throughout the winter. Walking on them in ordinary shoes, let alone barefoot, was physically unbearable. The stone instantly drew heat from the feet, causing the entire body to become hypothermic. To solve this problem, the floors were thickly covered with a layer of dry straw or hay. This plant-based flooring could be several dozen centimeters thick. It worked as an excellent insulating cushion, separating people's feet from the frozen stone.
Walking on such a floor was soft and, most importantly, relatively warm.
In essence, it was the first analog of modern carpet in history, only completely natural. In wealthy castles, more aesthetic materials were laid on top of the rough bottom layer of straw. Expensive woven mats made of river reeds, which were brought from far away, were often used. They looked much neater than ordinary straw and spread less dust around the living quarters. The quality of the flooring clearly indicated the status of the room and the wealth of its owner. But such flooring had one huge and extremely unpleasant drawback. It required constant care and regular replacement by dozens of servants. Food scraps, dirt from boots, and animal excrement quickly accumulated in the straw. After feasts, bones remained under the tables, rotting in the warm hay. To mask the inevitable smell of decay and dampness, medieval people came up with a clever trick. They added fragrant herbs such as lavender, mint, chamomile, and thyme to the fresh straw. In the chambers of the wealthiest lords, the floor was even strewn with dried rose petals.
This transformed the dirty flooring into a giant, long-lasting air freshener.
The mechanics of this natural freshener were ingeniously simple and effective. When people walked on the floor, the dry herbs broke under the weight of their boots. At that moment, the strong essential oils hidden in the plants were released into the air. They refreshed the stagnant winter air and served as a mild antiseptic. Many of these herbs did indeed have scientifically proven bactericidal properties. For example, thyme and lavender can repel fleas and other blood-sucking insects. Modern chemistry uses the same essential oils to produce expensive repellents. In the Middle Ages, they were simply scattered underfoot for the sake of survival. Replacing this floor covering was a large-scale sanitary operation. Old rotting straw was raked out with shovels and burned or sent to be used as fertilizer. Stone floors were thoroughly swept before new armfuls of hay were brought in. During the coldest months, this procedure had to be postponed so as not to cool the rooms. Today we use heated floors that run on electricity or hot water. For medieval people, a warm floor meant a layer of dry grass knee-deep. It sounds like a recipe for allergies, but back then, it was the only way to keep your feet from freezing. Survival required compromises, and clean air was often sacrificed for warmth. Interestingly, this practice continued for many centuries without much change. It was only with the development of woodworking that floors began to be covered with thick wooden planks. But even wooden floors could not compare in heat capacity to a thick layer of straw. The next step in the fight for warmth required intervention at the level of the castle's architecture itself. The layout of a medieval castle was never random or merely decorative. It was originally designed with harsh climatic conditions and the physics of heat conservation in mind. The builders understood that it was physically impossible to heat the entire stone mass of the fortress. Therefore, they created a complex zoning system, concentrating heat in the necessary places. The living quarters of the Lord, his family, and the most important guests were strategically located. They were always placed on the upper floors of the keep or internal protected towers. Since warm air from the fireplaces on the lower floors always rises, this gave an advantage. The upper rooms naturally received additional passive heating. Wooden floor slabs and open stairwells acted as channels for heat transfer. In addition, the location high above the ground solved another critical problem. It protected the living quarters from the icy dampness that constantly rose from the protective moats. The fog hanging above the ground simply did not reach the windows of the upper floors. The living quarters themselves, which were used in winter, were radically different from the ceremonial halls. They were made relatively small in size and often with lower ceilings. The volume of air in such a room was minimal, which allowed it to be quickly heated by a single fireplace. It's pure thermodynamics. The smaller the volume, the less wood is needed to heat it. The grand reception rooms with their huge arches and colossal volumes of space were empty. They were mainly used for large receptions, courts, or large festive feasts. In everyday winter life, it was too cold and uncomfortable to be there. The nobility preferred to retreat to compact, cozy rooms, saving heat and resources. These winter rooms were often designed with the sun's trajectory in mind. Their windows faced south to catch the rare rays of the winter sun. Even the weak winter sun, warming the stone windowsill, contributed to the overall temperature. These were true sunrooms, creating a comfortable atmosphere for reading and conversation. Modern architects call this energy-efficient passive building design. We use computer modeling to calculate insulation and airflow. Medieval craftsmen calculated all this in their minds, relying on centuries of experience. A mistake in the calculations meant that the owner of the castle would freeze for the rest of his life. Castles were often built like Russian nesting dolls, rooms within rooms, protected by corridors. Long, winding passages served as buffer zones between the icy courtyard and the warm chambers. They dampened gusts of wind, preventing drafts from directly entering the living quarters. Every door and every turn in the corridor was part of a complex energy conservation system. This architecture required the inhabitants to move around constantly, depending on the season. In summer, the lords could live in spacious, cool halls on the lower floors. In winter, the entire court migrated upstairs, crowding into small but warm rooms. Life literally pulsated inside the castle, following the changes in the outside temperature. But the most amazing thing was how architects used external energy sources. In a medieval castle, there was one object that produced a tremendous amount of heat. It was the heart of any fortress, a place where the fire never went out for a minute. And engineers learned to use this heat for centralized heating of the elite chambers. Castle kitchens were giant industrial complexes of the harsh medieval era. Several huge hearths burned around the clock to support the garrison. Hundreds of loaves of bread were baked there, whole carcasses of animals were roasted, and huge pots of soup were cooked. This colossal concentration of thermal energy could not be wasted in a cold climate. Clever architects skillfully used this round-the-clock industrial heat to heat adjacent rooms. Kitchens were often located directly in the basements under the main ceremonial halls. Hot air from giant ovens naturally rose upward, warming the stone floors of the hall. It was an early, primitive, but incredibly powerful central heating system. Sometimes kitchens were built so that their stoves shared walls with living areas. The heat from the kitchen hearth slowly transferred through the thick stone walls to the dining rooms. The wall behind which bread was baked turned into a giant warm radiator. You could lean your back against it and warm up even in the harshest January frosts. Working in such a castle kitchen in winter was not just warm, but really hot. Cooks and kitchen boys often worked in light linen shirts, despite the blizzard outside. It was the only place in the castle where people regularly suffered from heat stroke. The contrast between the icy courtyard and the blazing kitchen was truly shocking. Realizing the incredible value of this free heat, some small castles were designed with a special layout. The owner's living quarters were located in close proximity to the huge kitchen chimneys. Hot brick pipes running through the floors gave off some of their heat to the bedrooms. This allowed the lord to save wood in his private fireplaces without sacrificing comfort. The stones, heated by constant cooking, had incredible heat capacity. They slowly released the accumulated heat into the adjacent rooms throughout the cold night. Even when the main fireplaces in the bedrooms died down by morning, the kitchen wall remained warm. This inertial heating system saved lives during the harshest night frosts. Modern engineers admire this integration of processes into a single survival system. Today we call it heat recovery, when the byproduct of production is used for heating. Factories use steam from turbines to heat neighboring areas. Medieval castles did the same, using the heat from roasting boars. Of course, this system had its obvious domestic drawbacks. Along with the heat, the smells of garlic, fried onions, and burnt fat penetrated the living quarters. But in conditions where the alternative was to freeze to death, people simply turned a blind eye to the smells. The aroma of fresh bread in the bedroom seemed a small price to pay for the opportunity to sleep in warmth. This synergy between the kitchen and the living quarters demonstrates the incredible practicality of our ancestors. They could not afford to waste resources. Every log had to serve a dual purpose. Heat was a currency more valuable than gold when the temperature dropped below zero. But all these efforts could be ruined by a single crack in the wall. Drafts were the most ruthless and invisible enemy of heat in any stone building. The huge windows of castles, necessary for lighting and defense, were gaping holes in the insulation. The wind easily penetrated inside, instantly cooling the hard-heated rooms. Window protection became the most important frontier in the war against the medieval winter. Glass windows in those days were incredibly rare and astronomically expensive. Making large transparent glass was technologically difficult, and only kings could afford it. Most window openings in castles remained simply open holes in thick walls. In winter, they had to be closed tightly with massive oak shutters on heavy forged hinges. These wooden shields were tightly fitted to stone frames and locked with powerful iron bolts. The shutters reliably blocked the icy wind, creating a physical barrier between the blizzard and the bedroom. But this effective solution had one extremely depressing side effect. The closed shutters plunged the rooms into almost complete, ringing darkness, even at midday. If the owners wanted to preserve even a glimmer of light, they had to resort to technological tricks. Wooden frames were often covered with well-oiled paper or thick linen cloth. Sometimes finely crafted horn or dried bull bladders stretched like a drum were used. These translucent materials allowed dim, diffused light into the gloomy rooms of the castle. Naturally, such glass substitutes were extremely fragile and unreliable. They had to be constantly repaired and restretched after every strong winter storm. a sharp gust of wind could easily tear the oiled fabric, letting an icy whirlwind into the room. It was a constant battle to balance the desire to see light with the desire to stay warm. In addition to the windows, the numerous doorways in the corridors remained a huge problem. Every time a servant opened a door, precious warm air was blown into the icy hallway. To minimize these losses, heavy wool curtains or bearskins were hung in front of the doors. These curtains acted as thermal barriers, trapping drafts at the entrance. Modern shopping malls use heat guns above entrances for the same reason. They cut off the cold outside air from the warm air inside the building. The medieval equivalent of a heat gun was a thick, heavy skin hanging from the ceiling to the floor. A person would walk through it, and the fabric would instantly close behind them. The fight against drafts reached the point of paranoia among the castle's inhabitants. Servants constantly caulked the cracks in the shutters with wool, moss, or rags. The slightest whistle of wind in the wall was perceived as an alarm signal, requiring immediate attention. The cold was an insidious enemy that always found its way into the fortress. But even with the shutters tightly closed and the doors curtained, the huge rooms cooled down at night. When the fire in the fireplace died down, the temperature rapidly dropped to zero. Sleeping in such conditions without additional protection was deadly dangerous. And then the engineers came up with a way to create a micro room inside the bedroom itself. A night in a poorly heated part of the castle could be fatal during the severe January frosts. Winter temperatures in stone fortresses often drop below zero, turning sleep into a dangerous ordeal. When asleep, a person loses the ability to move actively and generate additional heat for natural body warming. Freezing came on imperceptibly, claiming the lives of even the most noble and wealthy inhabitants of the palaces. Therefore, the sleeping quarters of the highest nobility were designed by engineers as completely autonomous and reliable shelters for survival. Canopy beds were invented by craftsmen precisely for this purely practical and not at all decorative purpose. 4 tall and very sturdy posts at the corners of a massive wooden bed reliably supported a thick canopy. These supports were often made of durable oak and decorated with intricate carvings to demonstrate the status of the owner. Heavy woolen or very thick velvet curtains hung down from this upper canopy on all 4 sides. The fabric was specially selected for its high thermal insulation properties and ability to block the wind. When the servants drew these curtains tightly at night, the huge bed instantly turned into a closed fabric capsule. The air inside this protective capsule was completely and reliably insulated from the icy drafts of the huge stone bedroom. This small and cozy fabric tent inside the huge room warmed up phenomenally quickly with the natural heat of human bodies. 2 or 3 people sleeping together generated enough energy to warm the limited volume of enclosed air. Their steady warm breath worked like a miniature heater, steadily raising the temperature under the thick canopy. The fabric prevented this invaluable heat from escaping under the high stone arches of the cold hall. The temperature difference between the tightly curtained bed and the frozen room outside could reach 10 degrees. It was a matter of survival and health, cleverly disguised as a luxurious piece of expensive interior design. In the harshest winters, the effect of such a canopy became even more obvious and life-saving for the lords. When a snowstorm raged outside the window, a comfortable above-zero temperature was maintained inside the fabric capsule. People could sleep peacefully without fear of waking up with frostbite or a severe cold in the morning. Interestingly, the bed was often made very large so that several people could sleep there. Children, parents, and sometimes even beloved pets sleeping together created an additional powerful source of heat. All this turned the bed into a real lifeboat in the middle of the icy ocean of a winter castle. The weight of all these blankets and skins was quite impressive, so you had to sleep almost motionless under them. However, it was this very weight that provided the necessary feeling of security and pressed the heat-insulating layers tightly against the body. The person was sealed in a warm envelope from which not a drop of life-giving heat could escape. If someone got too hot, they could simply throw back the top fur, leaving only a light wool blanket. This flexible system made it easy to regulate the temperature under the canopy depending on the weather. In the morning, the servants first lit the fireplace, and only then did the masters decide to leave their down-filled refuge. It is interesting to observe how this vital item for survival has become a banal status symbol over time. As home heating systems improved, The original practical function of thick curtains was gradually forgotten. Today, huge four-poster beds are associated exclusively with romance and the luxurious interiors of fairy tale royal palaces. They are decorated with light, semi-transparent silk, which is completely incapable of protecting against the real winter cold. In fact, in the past, they were simply high-tech and functional sleeping bags from the harsh Middle Ages. Their cumbersome design was dictated solely by the banal fear of freezing to death in one's own home while sleeping. The idea of safely transferring heat over a distance was brilliantly embodied in copper and iron devices. Servants became true climate control operators, preparing beds for their frozen masters every day. The use of hot coals required extreme caution to avoid setting fire to the down feather bed. But the risk was worth it, because lying down in a warm and dry bed was an incredible bliss in the middle of winter. This invention forever changed the quality of nighttime rest in cold European castles. And this solution became the ancestor of all modern electric blankets and radiators.
Yes, Mum.
Since it was physically impossible to heat the entire volume of large castle rooms, people looked for workarounds. Huge halls with stone walls absorbed heat from the fireplace faster than the burning wood could release it. As soon as you moved to the far corner of the library or dining room, thick white steam began to come out of your mouth again. Medieval inhabitants quickly realized the ineffectiveness of attempts to heat the entire room and began to actively use local and strictly individual heating systems. Portable metal braziers became a real salvation for those who, due to the nature of their work, could not constantly sit by the main fireplace. These were large bronze or very heavy wrought iron bowls mounted on tall, stable legs. This approach radically changed the very concept of home comfort during the cold season. Instead of heating the walls, people began to heat the space directly around them. This required much less fuel and gave quick, tangible results in any corner of a huge palace. Blacksmiths competed in skill, creating true works of art from simple iron and copper. The legs of braziers were often decorated with castings in the form of lion paws or mythical griffins, emphasizing the status of their owner. These interior items became an integral part of the winter life of any wealthy European family of that time. Special ingenious devices were used to preheat cold beds quickly. These were elegant flat copper or heavy brass warmers with very long wooden handles to ensure the safety of servants. Small hot coals were poured into such a warmer, which was very similar to a closed frying pan with holes in the lid. The metal lid was securely fastened with a latch so that no hot coals would accidentally fall onto the expensive fabrics. Experienced servants very carefully and quickly ran this hot pan between the cold sheets shortly before their master went to bed. They smoothed the fabric as if with an iron, transferring the heat accumulated by the metal from the birch coals to it. These pocket warmers often had the shape of an apple or a small book, so as not to attract unnecessary attention in public. A pinch of dried herbs or cloves was sometimes added inside so that a pleasant and subtle aroma would spread when heated. Thus, the device performed two functions at once. It warmed the hands and served as a kind of medieval perfume. Priests used similar devices to keep their fingers from freezing while holding cold golden chalices in front of the altar for long periods of time. It was a real fashion statement and a sign of high wealth, available only to the wealthiest townspeople and lords. Master jewelers competed to create the most beautiful and technically perfect pocket warmers. The internal design of such a handheld spherical warmer was truly ingenious and was decades ahead of its harsh time. A piece of hot coal inside was held in a special gimbal suspension consisting of several movable metal rings. No matter how hard or carelessly a person twisted this beautiful sphere in their frozen hands, the hot coal always remained in a strictly horizontal position. This clever mechanical system reliably prevented accidental and painful burns to the fingers from suddenly falling ashes. It allowed cold palms to be warmed safely and for a long time during long winter horse rides or travels. It was a true marvel of engineering at the time, easily fitting in the palm of a frozen European aristocrat's hand. A similar principle of cardan suspension was later used extensively in ship compasses to protect them from strong sea swells. It is surprising that such complex geometry found its first widespread application in the field of personal comfort and heating. The inventors of the past had a perfect understanding of the laws of physics and knew how to apply them to solve the most pressing everyday problems. Each such device was assembled by hand and was very expensive. being passed down from mother to daughter. Winter life without this small, warm ball in their pocket seemed simply unbearable and full of suffering to the nobility. Technology served as a shield that separated the delicate inhabitants of castles from the harsh and merciless winter nature. The main and most reliable source of heat in a huge and cold stone castle, strange as it may sound to modern man, remained the people themselves. Sleeping together in one large bed, wearing thick clothes and constantly moving, warmed them better than any bronze bowls with coals. Human biology, our ability to adapt and share our natural warmth with loved ones, saved more lives than all the inventions of blacksmiths. Our ancestors instinctively huddled together to survive the darkest and coldest nights in European history. Human biology became the last line of defense in the battle against the extreme medieval cold. The most important, albeit unusual, source of heat in a huge stone castle was its inhabitants themselves. The human body constantly emits heat, functioning as a biological battery with a temperature of about 36 degrees Celsius. When several dozen people gather in a single enclosed space, the air temperature rises significantly. This physiological feature saved thousands of lives in the era before central heating. During the harshest and bleakest weeks of winter, the lords often gave up their proud seclusion. They left their private chambers and went downstairs to the great hall of the castle. The entire military garrison, numerous household members, and absolutely all the servants were also gathered there. Life in the entire castle centered around one or two main blazing fireplaces. Huge dining tables were moved as close as possible to the source of the life-saving fire. The strict social distances between the nobility and the commoners were temporarily reduced for the sake of simple survival. 200 people breathing in one room can warm the air more effectively than a ton of firewood. Biological heating worked flawlessly, turning the crowd into a single heating mechanism. Ordinary servants and rank-and-file guards never had their own heated rooms in the castle. They slept right on the floor in the great hall, on those very bundles of straw by the fire. To keep from freezing in their sleep, they lay close together, sharing their warmth. Other lucky ones settled down for the night in the kitchen itself, huddling around the still warm stoves. In some cases, servants were assigned tasks that seemed strange from a modern perspective. They were ordered to sleep on the floor in the Lord's bedroom, at the foot of his huge bed. They ensured security and were always ready to carry out any nighttime orders from their master. But their main function was hidden. Their bodies gave off extra heat into the room. The servants worked as biological heaters for their freezing, aristocratic masters. The more people breathed in the Lord's closed bedroom, the higher the temperature rose. This sounds absolutely wild to modern people, who are accustomed to personal space. But when a blizzard is raging outside the window, the laws of thermodynamics override the rules of etiquette. Modern Antarctic researchers know this effect. A crowded tent is always warm. Medieval people used the same principle to survive in extreme conditions. They huddled together like animals during the harsh winter to conserve energy. Aristocratic pride gave way to the instinct of self-preservation, which dictated that they stick together. This temporary blurring of boundaries created a unique psychological atmosphere inside the castle besieged by winter. Everyone understood that they depended on each other in this endless battle with the ice. But as soon as spring came and the stones thawed, the social hierarchy was instantly restored. The lords returned to their chambers and the servants went to the stables. But even when gathered around the fireplace, it was necessary to protect one's body. The air in the castle was still cold enough to make one shiver. This is where layered fashion, dictated solely by the harsh climate, came to the rescue. Inside the stone castle in winter, people dressed no lighter than when going outside. The huge stone halls froze through during the long frosty months, turning into veritable glaciers. The temperature difference between the open snow-covered courtyard and the unheated corridors was often minimal. The wind blew freely through the spacious galleries, penetrating through the cracks in the wooden shutters. Living in such conditions was a real test for the human body day after day. People had to constantly wear layers of thick clothing, even when sitting by the fireplace. The fashion of the medieval nobility was dictated by the harsh necessity of survival, not just aesthetics. Every detail of the wardrobe was thought out in terms of preserving precious body heat. Luxury was expressed not in the openness of the outfits, but in the stunning quality of the warm materials used. The richer the lord, the higher quality and denser wool he could afford. The poor were left with only coarse and prickly fabrics, which did not keep them warm as well and wore out quickly. The nobility, on the other hand, wrapped themselves in soft and incredibly warm fabrics brought from distant countries. Mantles, long cloaks, and capes were generously lined with marten, ermine, or squirrel fur. These small animals had the thickest and softest fur, ideal for the nobility. This fluffy layer created an insurmountable physical barrier to the cold air trying to reach the body. Hundreds of valuable skins could be used to create one good winter mantle. Peasants were forbidden to wear noble fur and had to be content with coarse sheepskins. In the Middle Ages, warmth was as much an indicator of social status as gold. Even indoors, people constantly wore various headgear. The high vaulted ceilings of castles were real traps for the meager heat from the fireplace. Cold air constantly sank down, forcing people to wrap up not only their bodies, but also their heads. Thick woolen bonnets, heavy hoods, or expensive fur hats were used. Women often wore complex, multi-layered fabric structures that covered their ears and necks. Men preferred deep hoods that could be pulled down over their eyes in strong drafts. Doctors of the time were well aware that the body loses a huge amount of heat through an uncovered head. Medical treatises strictly prescribed keeping the head warm to avoid fatal diseases. Because of this rule, even at the dinner table, aristocrats rarely took off their headgear. Removing one's hat was a sign of the deepest respect, which was shown only for a short time. Walking around with an uncovered head in a winter castle was a sign of madness, not bravery. Freezing to death in one's own home was a very real and frightening prospect. Thick woolen stockings were worn on the feet, often in several layers. Stone floors always remained icy, drawing heat from the body through the feet. Therefore, indoor shoes were supplemented with wooden clogs with thick soles. Modern people would feel like they were in a sauna wearing that much wool and fur. It's hard for us to imagine how anyone could spend whole days in such thick clothing, but people in the past had to constantly work to keep themselves warm. But for a medieval resident, this was standard home clothing for going to the next room. Without this protective armor, any trip down a long stone corridor threatened to cause a cold. Servants, who had to run around the castle, also tried to dress as warmly as possible. Clothing was essentially a wearable home, an individual fortress protecting against the ever-present cold. People slept, ate, and prayed in this fortress, practically never taking it off until spring. This was the only way to survive in an era when central heating did not yet exist. Interestingly, the cut of these clothes was as closed as possible, without unnecessary cutouts. Deep necklines and short sleeves were absolutely unthinkable in the harsh winter realities of Europe. Collars were made high so that they fit snugly around the neck and protected against drafts. Long sleeves and hems down to the floor prevented the escape of body heat. Women often wore dresses with huge trains, which provided additional warmth for their legs when walking. Men's tunics also fell below the knees, reliably covering all vital organs. The more fabric surrounded a person, the more likely they were to avoid pneumonia. Lung diseases were a real scourge at the time, and there was no effective treatment for them. Therefore, prevention through thick clothing remained the only way to stay healthy. Fashion literally served as armor, not against swords, but against the cold wind. Tailors worked like armorers, creating reliable protection from cloth and fur. The quality of the seams and the tightness of the fabric against the body were valued above any beautiful patterns. Modern materials such as fleece or lightweight fabrics are incredibly weightless and thin. They allow us to enjoy winter without feeling like clumsy, heavy bears. Technology has freed us from the need to carry enormous weight on our shoulders to stay warm. Medieval clothing weighed several kilograms and severely restricted any rapid movement. It was incredibly difficult to run fast or perform delicate physical work in such attire. People moved slowly and smoothly, conserving their strength under the weight of velvet and fur. Carrying this enormous weight all day long was a kind of physical training in endurance. By evening, shoulders and backs were incredibly tired from the weight of woolen cloaks and massive hats. Resting by the blazing fireplace was a long-awaited relief from this exhausting daily burden. Surviving in a medieval castle required not only a strong immune system, but also physical strength. This was the price that had to be paid for the right to stay alive until spring. When we look at portraits of medieval nobility in their luxurious furs, we see wealth. In reality, we are looking at people who were desperately trying to keep warm in stone refrigerators. Their outfits were the high-tech survival gear of their era. Without these layers of wool, even the most powerful king would have turned into an ice statue. Survival in a medieval castle in winter was a triumph of human ingenuity over the cruelty of nature. They had no electricity, gas, or thermostats, but they understood the laws of thermodynamics perfectly well. From the architecture of chimneys to multi-layered beds, every detail of their daily life was geared toward conserving energy. The modern world has given us the illusion of absolute control over the climate at the touch of a button. But the methods used by ancient engineers to solve the impossible tasks of survival still inspire genuine admiration.